I watched a guy cry in a coffee shop last week. Not like sobbing, more like sitting there with his laptop open, staring at a spreadsheet, and just quietly falling apart. And I wouldn't normally notice something like that, except I could see his screen. It was a brokerage account, and the number on it was over $900,000. This man had nearly $1 million, and he looked like someone had just told him his dog died. I thought about him all week, because I think I know exactly what happened to him. He saved for years, did everything right, hit his number, probably quit his job thinking, I'm free. And then the market did what the market does, and suddenly that freedom started shrinking in real time while he sat there watching it happen over a latte. That's the version of passive income nobody makes a YouTube video about. The version everyone sells you is the one where you buy a few index funds, set up some rental properties, and spend the rest of your life on a beach collecting checks. That life exists. But the gap between that fantasy and how it actually works is where people lose everything. Today, I'm breaking down the real math behind living off passive income. I'll show you why $1 million isn't always enough, why the market can betray you at the worst possible moment, and why half the people who achieve financial freedom end up going back to work within 18 months. Not because they ran out of money, but because of something nobody warned them about. That last part changes everything. So stay with me. Let's get into it. That guy in the coffee shop? I'm almost certain I know what got him. It's called sequence of returns risk. And it's the single scariest concept in all of personal finance that almost nobody explains properly. Here's the deal. You saved $1 million. You finally quit. You're pulling out $40,000 a year to live on because that's what all the math says is safe. But in your very first year, the market drops 20%. Your million is now $800,000. You still need to eat and pay rent, so you pull out your $40,000. Now you're at $760,000. Year 2, another 10% drop. You pull out another $40,000 plus inflation. In 24 months, you've burned through nearly a third of everything you spent decades building. And to recover, the market would need to rocket. But you've got way less money in the game now. The math starts working against you permanently. Picture it. You're at your kitchen table 3 months after leaving a good job. Your partner is across from you. And you're staring at an account that's lost $240,000 since you quit. When you had a paycheck, market drops felt like background noise. You could be a long-term investor easily because rent was covered no matter what. But when your portfolio is your only lifeline, a 10% dip feels like the floor being pulled out from under your entire life. That's what I think happened to the coffee shop guy. Not bad planning, just bad timing. And emotional pressure no spreadsheet prepares you for. This is financial psychology in its rawest form. Your relationship with risk changes completely the second you don't have income backing you up. So what do the smart people do? They build a cash buffer. 1 to 3 years of living expenses in cash or short-term bonds before they stop working. If the market crashes in year 1, you don't sell a single share. You live off the buffer and let your investments recover. Historically, that recovery takes a couple of years, so your buffer buys you exactly the time you need. You might be thinking, does holding that much cash drag returns down a little? Yeah, but it means you never sell stocks at rock bottom to buy groceries. That one move can be the difference between your plan surviving and your whole thing falling apart. All right, so now you understand the monster that can wreck even a perfect setup. Let's talk about the math that gets you there in the first place. You've probably heard of the 4% rule. It's the golden formula of the retire early world. The idea is simple. You invest a big pile of money, pull out 4% in your first year of retirement, adjust for inflation each year, and based on decades of historical data, your money should last at least 30 years. So people figure out their freedom number by dividing their annual spending by 4%. If you spend $40,000 a year, that gives you $1 million. If you spend $80,000, then it's $2 million. That's your target. Sounds clean, right? Save $1 million, you're done. But here's what they leave out. That 4% number came from historical US data during some of the strongest economic decades in modern history. More recent research from Morningstar has suggested that in today's environment, 4% might be too aggressive. They've argued for something closer to 3.3% or 3.5%. 0.5%, who cares, right? Let me show you. If you need $40,000 a year and the real safe number is 3.5%, you don't need $1 million. You need $1,150,000. An extra $150,000 for the exact same life. And here's the other thing that bothers me. When you're using the 4% rule, you're not living off income. You're selling pieces of your portfolio every month, betting that what's left grows faster than what you take out. That's not passive income. That's a slow motion bet on the next 30 years. And then there's inflation. $40,000 today buys way less than it did 10 years ago. If inflation runs at just 3%, in 20 years you'll need roughly $72,000 for the same groceries and the same electricity bill. Your kid goes from kindergarten to college in that time, and your expenses nearly double without you changing a thing. If your passive income comes from something fixed, like a bond that doesn't adjust, you're getting an invisible pay cut every year without realizing it. Now I know exactly what some of you are thinking. Clara, I don't want to sell my stocks. I want rent checks and dividends. I never touch the principal. That's real passive income. It sounds safer. You own 10 rental units and collect $4,000 a month. If the market crashes, you still get your rent check. It feels tangible, bulletproof. That feeling of safety is exactly why people rush in without doing the real math. Let's say you buy a duplex that rents for $2,000 a month. $24,000 a year in passive income, right? No, that's gross revenue. Before you subtract property taxes, insurance, repairs, vacancies, management fees, and the new roof every 15 to 20 years, that's coming whether you like it or not. After all of that, your actual net income might be closer to $600 a month, not $2,000. And that's before income tax. So to replace a $40,000 salary with net rental income, you might need 10 or 12 units, all paid off. At that point, you're not a passive investor. You're a property manager with a very expensive second career. And when you're spending 10 hours a month dealing with tenant issues, late payments, and emergency repairs, the IRS might call it passive income, but your calendar won't. I've heard from so many people who hit their freedom number with rentals and realized they just traded a boss for 20 tenants who call at midnight because the hot water broke. So if the 4% rule is fragile, real estate isn't truly passive, and dividends alone won't cut it. What's the actual play? The people who genuinely pull this off don't rely on one thing. They build layers. At the base, they've got low-cost index funds. S&P 500 total market stuff. Boring. That's the point. This is where compounding does the heavy lifting over decades. On top of that, some kind of cash flow. A rental, dividends, or maybe a small project they enjoy. This doesn't need to cover everything. Just the basics. Groceries, utilities, so if the market crashes, they know they're okay without having to sell anything. And then the cash buffer. 1 to 3 years of expenses in a boring savings account. The shock absorber. Now here's a concept that should be taught in schools. The passive FI ratio. It's just your passive income divided by your monthly expenses. So let's say your expenses are $3,500 a month, and you've got $1,000 coming in from dividends and a small rental. That puts your ratio at about 28%. You don't need 100% for your life to feel completely different. At 30%, your rent is basically covered without you lifting a finger. You wake up knowing that even if you got laid off today, you'd still have a roof over your head next month. Do you know what that does to your stress level? At 50%, you could take a job that pays half as much but makes you twice as happy. You're not working to survive anymore. You're working because you chose to. We've covered the money, the math, the strategies. But there's one more thing, and it might be the most important part of this whole video. Here's what happens to many people who actually achieve financial independence. The first 2 weeks feel like paradise. Sleep in, go for walks, read all those books you've been putting off for years. By month 3, something feels off. There's this low hum of anxiety you can't name. By month 6, some people are genuinely depressed, sitting there going, I have everything I worked for. Why do I feel terrible? Here's why. We get a massive amount of our identity, our social circle, and our sense of purpose from work, whether we like the job or not. Strip that away overnight, and you're left with a question most people have never seriously answered. Who am I when I don't have to do anything? A week at the beach is a vacation. A year at the beach is an identity crisis. The people who make passive income work in the long term aren't the ones who stop doing everything. They're the ones who stop doing work they hate and start doing work they choose. Consulting 2 days a week, a passion project, teaching, something. The goal isn't to do nothing. It's about having complete control over how you spend your time. That's not retirement. That's autonomy. Living off passive income isn't a finish line. It's a system you build in layers. Growth engine for the long game. Cash flow for stability. A buffer for when life gets ugly. And a reason to get out of bed that has nothing to do with a paycheck. You're not trying to become a person who does nothing. You're trying to become a person who doesn't have to. Start tonight. Open your banking app. Ask yourself one question. What would it take for passive income to cover just my rent? Not everything, just that one line item. Because once that's handled, you stop making decisions out of fear and start making them out of choice. That's freedom. And that's all for today. If you find this video eye-opening, make sure you hit the like button. And also don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more of these kinds of videos. Thanks for watching.